Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We have been in an in-camera session. I do need a councillor to move that we come out of the in-camera. Councillor Black, thank you. Councillor Black has moved that committee adjourns our closed session at 3:05 p.m. and reconvenes in open session. Those in favor of that motion? I see everyone in favor. Thank you very much. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this part of our council and committee meeting for February the 7th. We have been in camera for the last almost essentially 2 hours, and we have been dealing with confidential matters in relation to our county manager recruitment process, and it will have to remain confidential for the time being. I would just remind those that weren't here at 1 o'clock, if you do happen to have a cell phone or other device that might go off on us, would you please put it in vibration mode or turn it off so it doesn't disturb anyone. We do have our cameras rolling, of course, and projecting of the meeting. We don't have a volunteer today, but it is being projected over the internet and cable TV. We're now going to proceed with a presentation on staff report DCS 17-18, which is our 5-year official plan review, issues and options final report. And Mary, you and I spoke just briefly before we started. I'd like you to introduce John again and perhaps just very briefly explain to us the process we're going to follow. Our consultant, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Beside me is Matt Reniers, who is our planning consultant for this project. I just want to say that there's a lot attached to this brief staff report, which brings to you the final issues and options report. The right-hand column with recommendations has been filled in, and that's what we're here to discuss tonight. Or this afternoon. I do want to mention, though, that all the other attachments before that, there's a lot of information in there. We were quite pleased with the turnout at the open house on November 30th, and the staff technical team meeting. There was lots of good discussion about what should be an official plan and not. The 150 responses to our website survey was well received, and certainly there's lots to chew on in there, lots to discuss. So with all of those different responses to our consultation and other submissions that were received from the advisory boards, I put them all together so you can see what kind of comments have been made on the issues and options. We reviewed them before we, as staff, looked at Matt's work. We do agree with the recommendations that he has in the report, and with that, I'd like to say on the projector right now, we just have the table of contents. What I discussed with Councillor Oliver is that probably the first 4 sets of issues, the agricultural lands, industrial development, the downtown commercial development, and the residential development, are probably the 4 areas that have the, I'll call them the hottest issues that perhaps you wanted to discuss. Of course, you're welcome to discuss any of the issues that you wish, and whether or not those recommendations are ones that you want us to carry forward with to start drafting the revised policy. So we're not going to be changing this report. You'll be giving us direction and resolutions today on anything you want to change in the recommendations. We'll take that direction, and that's on which we will draft the first draft of the revised official plan.
Thank you very much, Mary. And first, Matt, I apologize for misspeaking your name. Obviously, we all know who you are, and you've been with us through this whole process, and thank you for that. Do you want to make any introductory remarks before we begin to go through literally go through the pages? And I'll inform council, I think, of how we would like to approach this part of it. But first, would you like to make some comments? Yep, yours should go on. There you go.
I don't think so. I think Mary explained the process fairly well, and I think we should just get into it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, council, we've got the report. I'm sure you've all had a chance to go through it. Mary, I think, is suggesting to us, and not all the pages are numbered in sequence, but if you look about a third of the way through your package, it's when you come to the issues and options final report. I think that's where we want to start, Mary, and about 3 pages in from there, page 4 of that document, which, as I said, again, is about halfway through that whole clipped package you have, is the beginning of the actual issues. It listed the options, and now in the final report, it has a recommendation for how each of those issues would be addressed. And if council's agreeable, I think we'll only ask to stop on ones that you still have an issue with relative to the recommended solution that's shown in the report in the right-hand side. Is that clear enough to everyone then? So I'll be asking you as we flip through the pages, just simply to identify the issue number that you have a problem with still. And I think after we've had some discussion, we'll almost have to do a show of hands, Mary, with each individual recommendation as we go, if it's other than what's in the report. Agreed? And Madam Deputy Clerk, I think, I know you have an omnibus recommendation at the end, but we may have to do some of these individually if there's strong views other than what's in the report. Councillor Sonnenberg, first of all.
Thank you. I'm having trouble finding where you want to start.
Okay. Mary, you can help me here a little bit, but obviously this is the thick package that we received, individual sheets. There's some other background information material at the beginning. And as I said, again, about a third of the way through, it's labeled attachment number 8. It is the Issues and Options Final Report from Matt Reniers and Associates dated February 2017, which is obviously today. And 3 or 4 pages into that is where the table starts, and it lists all 100 and some odd plus issues that were identified. And on the right-hand side now has staff's recommendation, both our consultant and our staff, based on our input, public input, the open houses, etc. And what we'll be asking for, sorry, Councillor, no, just ones that you have a disagreement with what's in the report. You'll be given a chance to raise it, say, I don't agree with it, I think it should be this, and then we'll try and deal with it as a majority view. Is that okay, Councillor Sonnenberg, then? Thank you. Councillor Height next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, to me, this is a very important document, and I don't know that we should just glance over it and cherry pick a few items when, even in a budget, we would go line by line. One of my other concerns is that our councillor who's on the AG board isn't here today. I did tick off some of the recommendations that they made, but I think it would be wrong of us to just skip through these things and not give the public a chance. I don't know if the public's read all of this stuff that was posted probably at 1 o'clock yesterday or 4 o'clock on Friday, I mean.
Well, Councillor, the public would have had a chance to express their views on the optional approaches in earlier versions of this document. This is, don't forget, this one is in its present form as a result of input from everyone, I think. And again, today is only a recommendation. Obviously, it's ratified next week at council, so I would suggest to you at least, assuming Councillor Columbus is back next week, there would be, our final decision would be made relative to it at that time. But are you suggesting you don't even feel that we can or should deal with the recommended approaches in this report today? Are you wanting to defer the whole matter until
No,
a
I
future
think
date?
we should just go through them systematically and
Well, in a sense
get a
that-
brief view from our planning staff on what it'll do, how it'll affect things, and whether we like it or not. I know with this council, we sometimes go a bit sideways in debate, but it's usually pretty useful, and then we can come up with a consensus on what we feel is correct.
Well, that's not unlike what I'm suggesting, Councillor. I guess I'm assuming and hoping that certain ones we will not need discussion on because no one has an issue with what's in the report.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just try that and see how it goes, and if it falls apart, then I'll be open to some other suggestions. So the recommendations begin on page 4 of this report. It starts out with the agricultural lands issues, as Mary identified. I think the first 20 issues are all agricultural ones. So I'm asking if there are any concerns about the three recommendations on page 4. Page 4 and 5, or rather recommendations 4 and 5 are on page 5. Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 2,
Okay.
it talks about the difference between rural area, agricultural, and prime agricultural. I was under the impression that prime agricultural, that definition had more restrictions. Does it
Staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, the fact is that the prime agricultural designation is based on the class 1, 2, and 3 lands that are actually prime agricultural lands. So whether we call it prime agriculture or something else, it's still prime agricultural lands, and that would have the same restrictions. So I'm basically suggesting that we call it what it is, and I'll leave it at that.
So then what's with the rural area change?
The problem with the official plan, the way when I read it, was that you have two terms called agricultural. One is from Chapter 3 of the plan and refers to the community structure. And in that sense, agriculture is a very wide term. It also would include provincially significant wetlands, hazard lands, forests, a wide category of other types of land uses. And then on Schedule B, you have a land use designation called agriculture, which is much more restricted than what was on the other schedule. So I found that confusing, and what I'm trying to do, or recommending, is to call these the larger definition of agriculture something else, and suggestion is rural. You could use another term. Some official plans have the term countryside as a term for that, and then in the land use designation, use the term prime agriculture.
You're welcome. Councillor Geisens?
Mr. Chair, back to the same number 2. We're talking about prime agricultural land, and you suggested 1, 2, and 3, but I'm not sure that I agree with that being considered to be totally prime agricultural land. There may be some 1 or maybe 2, but once we get into 3, I'm not sure that that's prime agricultural land. Now, there is a perception out there by calling it prime agricultural land that will have some connotation as to what they can do and maybe cannot do. Is that correct?
In the provincial policy statement, prime agricultural land includes basically Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 lands. You do have a prime, when the area is prime agriculture, there is more restrictions in terms of use than other lands that are not considered prime.
Part of the problem is, and I can tell you in my area, that there is some land that's designated as prime land, but you wouldn't want to grow anything on it because the province and the Ministry of Agriculture doesn't always have it right. So I would prefer to keep what we had before. Is that possible?
Yes, it is possible, but I would recommend that you have, if you want to keep the land use designation as agricultural, which is what it is today, you can do that. I would still recommend that you change the broader concept of the term, of the areas outside of the settlements, call it something other than agriculture, because it is a broader, there's a broader meaning, and to have two meanings to the same term in one document, it adds confusion.
Well, I guess I'm getting confused. Agricultural land means you grow something, and theoretically, what does that change that we have to put another designation on it? I don't understand, I guess. So, like I said, we argued this the last time that it went through about prime agriculture, and the next one we're also going to talk about, which is the specialty crop areas. So theoretically, my own personal, I don't know whether I can make a motion, but that we leave it as it is, I guess would be my recommendation.
Okay, Councillor, I'm going to ask Mary Elder to just provide a comment, and then I will come back to you if, Mary, could you help us on this one?
So through the chair, we do have two separate things going on here. One is Schedule A, which comes out of the growth plan and the vision and so on, which is about what is your urban area, what is your hamlet area, what is your, what do you want to call it? Agricultural? Do you want to call it rural? That's Schedule A. So we're trying to decide a term that should be used there. If we use agriculture there under community structure, and we use in Schedule B, which is our land use designation, we use agriculture, it can mean two different things. And so all our consultant is saying is when you look at the land use designation in Schedule B, we can call it agriculture. He'd prefer to call it something else like prime agriculture. Fortunately, the 2014 provincial policy statement explains rural areas as being something broader than just agriculture. So it includes some of the other areas that we know that aren't as good for crop production in a rural area, but it's not rural meaning can't produce crops. So that's about Schedule A, but Schedule B is our designations around agriculture and whether we should call that prime agriculture or just leave it as it is as agriculture.
Councillor, I'm wondering if you would be agreeable, and I'm looking at issue number 2, on the right-hand side, the recommendation, staff and our consultant are saying, let's make 2 changes. We'll change the terminology in Schedule A to this generic rural area designation, and we'll change the land use designation, which I think is the one you're more concerned about, from agricultural to prime. What you might want to recommend, Councillor, is that in Schedule B, we leave the designation as agriculture. I think that still accomplishes what Matt has suggested he wants to see us do, which is to have a separate generic term for the broader designation, but still addresses your issue of not wanting it to be the terminology prime, which tends to have that more restrictive connotation. Does that capture what you're asking for?
I can live with that, yes.
Okay. So here's our first good example then, Mary. Do you want me to ask for a show of hands to make a modification to this recommendation that the Schedule B designation remain as agricultural? That would accomplish what Councillor Geisens has asked for and would give you some direction and our Deputy Clerk. Is that okay if we handle this way? Matt's nodding his head. Good. Okay. Councillor Geisens, further. Well, and if he's going on to something else, I'm going to ask him to hold off because I do want to vote on that one point.
Okay, sorry, that's
All right.
fine, yeah.
Council, issue number 2, that's the recommendation, that we leave the designation, land use designation in Schedule B of our OP as agricultural, rather than what's recommended in the report. Speaking to it? Yes. Okay.
Going to be if we have prime agriculture, and you heard the person say that, yes, could be different restrictions on it. The problem is that it's great for the province to say, well, you've got to do this because it's 1, 2, and 3 class land. Well, unfortunately, they didn't always get it right as to what is prime agricultural land and what isn't prime agricultural land. At one time, the sand that blew across Norfolk was considered to probably be a 4 or 5. It's now prime agricultural land. So to me, I would prefer that we leave it as agriculture and deal with it that way rather than try and make a change that will put some, I guess the question is this, let's say that there's a development who wants to, or a developer who wants to take a farmland out of production in Port Dover, just outside of Port Dover, and it's classified as prime agricultural land. The chances are of being able to do that may not be there without going through a whole lot of rigmarole, as far as I'm concerned. So theoretically, leave it as it is as agriculture. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Any further speakers to the motion? Councillor Brunton.
Well, just on what Councillor Geisens mentioned, to take a farm, irregardless of how it's classified, to develop it, does not have to be in the urban area based on what our rules are right now on the residential study. Like, you're not expanding nothing. So if that farm is within the urban boundary, it can be developed. Am I correct?
Mary?
Yes, you're correct.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
All right, any further speakers to the motion? I think you know the effect of the motion. It would be to change the recommendation, the second half of the recommendation, to leave the land use designation in Schedule B as agricultural. Those in favor? Those opposed? That does carry. Okay, with that having been dealt with, we've dealt with page number 4. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. Yep.
Number 3, when we're getting into specialty crops and everything like that, is that also going to be a new designation that we didn't have before?
Matt or Mary?
No, there's not a new designation. The policy in the plan today says that the council shall designate specialty crop areas upon the release of provincial guidelines. And what I'm attempting to do there in the recommendation is set out a process by which if and when the province does release guidelines on designating specialty crop areas, that this county would do an evaluation of its agricultural lands, consult with the Agriculture Advisory Board and the community, and from that determine the appropriateness of designating specialty crop areas. So it's not it more or less sets out the process, but it does not commit council to designating specialty crop areas. That would be come out of the process and whatever investigation and evaluation was carried out.
I guess the problem that I have, and it's under column 3, the county will undertake an evaluation of agricultural lands in accordance with guidelines established by the province and in consultation with the community to determine the appropriateness of designating special crop areas. The designation of any specialty crop areas and the addition of any associate policy will be through an amendment of this official plan. So are we then we're putting that in, what I just read?
I think, yes, Councillor, the answer is, but that what we would be putting in is wording that just says, if and when the province come up with its own guidelines for specialty crop lands, we are committing to evaluate our lands to determine how appropriate that is for lands within our county. We would do that ourselves as a municipality.
Well, it doesn't quite say that to me. I guess the county will undertake an evaluation of the agricultural lands in accordance with the guidelines established by the province.
Yes.
Where do you see that it says that we don't have to do it till the province says that we have to?
Well, I guess maybe I did read that into it. Matt, can you enlighten us? Is this something we will only initiate after the province has said you should do these or follow these guidelines?
Yes,
Yes.
the guidelines aren't available right now. There's been talk of them, but I don't know what the timing will be or if they ever will come out. So it's if and when the province comes out with these guidelines, you would do the evaluation. The provincial policy statement at this point says that municipalities shall consider specialty crop areas based on provincial guidelines. But they're not there. Do the study, determine whether it's appropriate for the county, then make that decision.
The only thing then, we are not going to put that revision that you're talking about in the, because you're talking at the very end, it says that it will have to be done through an official plan amendment. So theoretically, why would we put that in if it's not, we never know if it's going to happen?
Well, I think what we would be doing now is changing the section that's referenced there, 3.7.1.d, that would simply commit us to undertaking an evaluation and making that determination if and when the province's guidelines are released. Assuming we do the evaluation and any lands at all are designated by us as specialty, that would require an amendment to the OP at that time, not now.
I don't want the, I want it to say that once the province has done the guidelines and everything like that for specialty crops, that we will do it then, not put it in now.
Yep, that's fair. Mary, do you want to comment on this further?
I was just going to further explain that currently the policy says shall. We shall designate. So this is backing off from that, but it's playing a fine balancing act because the provincial policy says we shall, our official plan says we shall. We don't want to say we shall. We're saying let's say we'll do this study at the time when those policies come in to determine if we should.
Yep.
Forgetting to turn my mic on. Revise the policy on the designation of specialty crop areas to state that the county may consider such designations in consultation with the local agriculture community when provincial guidelines are available. I would agree with that 100%.
I think, Councillor, that's in essence what the recommendation does, provided Matt changes the wording to capture what you just said, once the guidelines are available. Would that satisfy you then? If we added that wording, and Matt, is that something you could add to that recommendation then?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Council, do you want this one done by motion? And I'm going to get to you, Councillor Heidt, in a sec. Madam Deputy Clerk, or to Mary Elder, I guess we should, because we changed some wording in a previous one. Okay. I'm going to get to that motion in a moment. Councillor Heidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the consultant, Ms. Elder, you mentioned that the provincial policy statement says you shall have this, and our official plan says you shall have this, but yet there's no guidelines? So no other municipality has set aside these specialty lands?
So the Ministry of Agriculture and Food has consulted with planning staff wanting to do a test study here in Norfolk County. We have not committed to that at all, okay? They have done one in Niagara, to my knowledge, and I believe they have been suggesting that they'd like to do it in Essex as a test. So no, they don't have their policies ready yet. They're just doing some testing stuff. We're saying let's just stand back for a while.
Thank you, because personally I'd prefer they didn't come here to test anything. When I look at that specialty crop area stuff, and then we see all the ginseng lands, and the province steps in and says, what, you can only grow ginseng on all of that land from now on? You can't do anything? Or you can only grow pumpkins on this? I don't think our farmers need that. And I don't really think we need the province telling us how to farm either. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome. Good comments. Now, Council, here's the motion that I'm going to be asking you to consider, put forward by Councillor Geisens, and that is that the recommendation around issue number 3 be amended to include words once the provincial guidelines become available. And we'll leave it to our consultant to insert them in the right spot in that recommendation. But that in essence says we wouldn't even undertake such a study to determine the appropriateness of specialty crop land designations until the guidelines have been released by the provincial government. That is the motion. Have we captured it, Madam Deputy Clerk? Okay, those in favor of that motion to change this policy? I see no one opposed to that, so that's carried. Thank you, Councillor. All right, now I'm going to move to page 4, which is issues 4 and 5. Any issues there with anyone? Mayor Luke.
Through you to staff, behind me there, apologize. Section 4, when I read through this on the lifestyle community, is the recommendation on the right side, is this sort of a housekeeping more than anything else?
Matt?
It basically is housekeeping.
Yeah, okay. That's all I need to know, because if it wasn't, then I need an explanation.
Okay.
Otherwise, what we're trying to accomplish. So housekeeping, I get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Page number 6. Councillor Geisens.
Page 5, just what the mayor
Oh,
talked
sorry.
about. Sorry.
Still on page 5, yep.
On page 4, when we're talking about, you said what it reads, it talks about that we can never make the hamlets bigger or any resort residential areas, settlement or boundaries need to expand. Is that correct?
Matt, to you, can you explain the wording of the recommendation a little bit further to us? And again, Council, I just remind you, what you really want to be concentrating on is the recommendation column on the right-hand side.
That's what I'm looking at.
Yep, okay, Matt,
It says,
please.
areas that will hamlets or resort residential areas, provided that settlement areas boundaries do not need to be expanded.
Yep.
So when you're never going to be able to, I guess, change the boundaries of a hamlet, or in some cases, some small towns as well.
It's not never. The official plan already has policies about expanding the boundaries of urban areas, and it's based on the need for expansion, and then there's some policy about where that expansion can occur, and avoiding prime agricultural lands as being one criteria. But the need to expand urban areas or some even hamlet areas is based on need, and there's a comprehensive analysis that needs to be done, and the plan amended to make that happen. So basically, the point is that those types of uses, lifestyle, residential community, are residential developments, is a form of residential development. They have to be subject to the same policies as other forms of residential development, and that includes the policies on urban settlement area boundaries, which includes the villages and towns and the hamlets.
I guess what I'm getting at, what you're telling me is, yeah, you can do it somewhere down the line, but what you're telling me here, what it reads here, are you prepared to add something to that if there is a need and I guess a plan put together, that can happen? And should that be part of this recommendation?
It can happen if there's space within an urban area or a hamlet, but if that development requires an expansion of those boundaries, then it, based on the other analysis that we've done as part of this review, it can't really be justified at this time.
Okay, and I guess, Matt, the other thing we need to realize is that this particular recommendation just deals with lifestyle residential communities as a land use, correct?
Correct.
And it's now going to be within what we will describe as the rural area rather than the agricultural area based on the change we made before. Is that also correct? Agricultural area of Schedule A, we've now decided is going to become known as rural areas in Schedule A. Is that correct?
No.
Okay, all right. Maybe I'll take that back and don't bother. I misunderstood. All right, anything further then on page number 5? Going to go to page number 6, and I've got a couple of speakers, Mayor Luke, then Councillor Height.
Thank you. Obviously, the top one, number 6 on page 6, we're going from increasing the restriction, increasing the use of a secondary business on a farm from the residential dwelling, the size of the residential, to now 1 hectare, correct? Through the chair?
On the on-farm diversified use, it's either 2% or 1 hectare.
Yeah, 2% to a
Of
max
the-
of 1 hectare, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that's a big change, and it's way overdue, thank you. But when we get down on the recommendation to the 3rd paragraph, and ensure that there is sufficient water and sewage capacity for the proposed use, you know, would that not naturally be the situation for somebody wishing to increase or establish a secondary use? Like, I'm just surprised that's in there. That's our concern, more so than the farmer?
Matt?
The concern is whether there's, if it's a heavy type of water use, whether there's adequate ability to deal with the sewage. So that's really why that's there.
Okay, Mr. Chair, that's an answer, and I accept it, but I'll tell you, I'm surprised that any farmer would go to the expense and the time to put in a secondary use and do it without assuring that they don't have a proper septic bed or water. That's just motherhood statement.
Yeah.
I mean, this is always the delays in development, or all these things that, I mean, if you don't have sufficient water and sewage capacity, how are you gonna operate? I mean, farmers, they're usually one step ahead of us, not getting approval for something that they don't have water if they're a heavy water user. You know, it just seems to be, I don't know. It's fine to leave it in there. I think it's a little bit overdone there myself.
Thanks, Mayor Luke. I was going to say to you, if you feel strongly, you could move a motion to delete that paragraph, because I think there'd be probably some support around the table. It is a motherhood statement, but I'm going to go to my next speaker first, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be moving that motion to remove that.
Okay.
And I'd like it, the next one down as well, removed. It says, ensure consistency with the OMAFRA guidelines on permitted uses in Ontario's prime agricultural areas. I don't think we need another layer. I think Norfolk County farmers are very inventive, and should they invent something new or something that they would like to see, I think it's council's obligation to at least hear it out, and I'm sure they're aware of the plan, and so be it, but I'd like those two gone.
Do you want to deal with them as one, Councillor, or two separate motions?
Better split it.
Pardon?
Better split it.
Yeah, I think that would be easier if you don't mind. Any further comments on issue number 6 and the recommendation that's there? I've got two motions that I'm going to be putting in front of you here. Seeing no further speakers, the first motion then would be to change the recommendation to delete the 3rd paragraph, which deals with ensuring sufficient water and sewage capacity, for the reasons that the mayor cited. Any speakers to that motion specifically? If not, those in favor? Anyone opposed to that? That does carry. And then the second change would be moved by Councillor Height, and that would be to delete the 4th paragraph in that recommendation, which is to ensure consistency with the guidelines for permitted uses in the prime ag areas. Speakers to that motion. Mayor Luke first.
I just want a response to the question, what happens if, in this situation of a farm expanding and providing a secondary use, what's the issue if it isn't consistent with OMAFRA guidelines or on the permitted uses in Ontario's prime agricultural areas? I don't know why that is so important. If it's not consistent with OMAFRA guidelines, but I can make it work, well, what's the difference?
Okay, I'm going to ask
That's-
staff or our
yeah,
consultant to
no,
respond.
the
I mean, what are the
harm if it doesn't.
implications?
Thank you.
Do
Yeah.
we go to jail if we
Yes.
approve a development of that type? contrary to
You went
the
further than I
prime
would.
ag guidelines. Matt or Mary?
I think we're maybe looking at it from another angle, but our approach was to ensure that the policies that are adopted in the official plan are consistent with the
Yes.
guidelines. Now, guidelines are fairly general. They don't specify the exact uses, because as someone has said, there may be something that comes up that no one has thought of, but there may very well be room in that within that policy framework. So the idea and the wording there was meant more to be consistent with the OMAFRA guidelines. And the other issue is that within that policy framework is to allow as much of that as possible as of right without going through a planning application. That's what we're aiming at. So hopefully a lot of the on-farm type applications will just happen, and as long as they meet the guidelines that are set in the official plan, and the official plan is consistent with the guidelines that are provincial policy.
Mary, further?
From staff's perspective, the provincial guidelines are actually providing more leniency. They're providing better understanding of what farm-related and on-farm diversified uses are, and how we can enable farming to be more profitable by using those types of things that are in those guidelines. So we're finding it a very, very useful tool. We hadn't been looking at it as restricting at all. We were finding it enabling.
And again, are we correct, Mary, in assuming that a guideline is a guideline? In fact, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's a guideline for uses within the prime areas?
That's correct,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Further to the motion, Mayor Luke.
Well, I agree with the explanation. I'm bothered by the word ensure. Maybe we could change it in such a way that it would have the word in should or shall or not shall, should or,
Have regard for.
pardon?
Have regard for?
Thank you. It's the ensure
Yeah.
that, it's a heavy hammer word to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Further to the motion, and the motion is to remove that paragraph completely from the recommendation. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? I see 3. Those opposed? I see 5, actually, because I would be opposed to that as well. So the motion is lost. Further, Mayor Luke?
What did you suggest?
Well, a less
Regards
hard-handed
to?
is to replace the word ensure, consistency with the words have regard for.
Thank you.
The OMAFRA guidelines of permitted uses, et cetera.
I would make that a motion, and I'm still is echoing that our planner is looking at this as a benefit, not
Yes.
a hindrance, and I'm starting to get my head around that, but I like your wording very much. It certainly brings it into play, but it doesn't have that heavy-fisted approach.
Are you prepared to move that, Mayor Luke? Yes. Okay. Speaking to this motion now, Councillor Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to remind this council that we see a lot of guidelines around here. Many of them end up being the word refused on applications because of said guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Any further speakers on this motion? Madam Deputy Clerk, have you got what you need? Okay. Do you need the motion read further? No. Okay. Those in favor of this motion? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? I see 2. That does carry. Okay. Anything further on page 6 then? Those 2 issues, that was an important one, and I'm glad we dealt with it. I'm going to move on to page 7 then. I see no hands with red flags coming up on page 7. Sorry, Councillor Black, page 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number 9.
Yep.
Just on the recommendation, remove the requirement 30% of the fruit used by the winery be grown on the property. My understanding was that this was done for a reason, and I wondered if staff can explain the reason. I thought the reason was to promote produce coming from the local area. And now this takes that away, and it can come from any area. So could you comment on that?
Mary?
Through the chair, staff at the time that we put the winery policies in the official plan, we're concerned that there be actual vines on the property, that there be wine grown there. So that's why we put in a percentage to be grown on the farm itself. What has come to light afterwards is that the VQA does require a certain percentage of the wine produced on the property to be from their grapes that they have grown. So it doesn't need to be there, it's redundant.
Okay, it's excellent.
Yep.
Thank you. Good answer.
Good point, Councillor. Seeing nothing further on page number 7. Page number 8. Seeing nothing there, I'm going to move to page number 9, which talks, I'm sorry, Councillor Sonnenberg. Yep, thank you. And of course, that severance of surplus farm dwellings kind of bridges a little bit of 8 and 9. So page number 9, Councillor Sonnenberg.
Yes, number 13, severance of surplus farm dwellings. As it is now, our plan says that before you can sever a house from a farm, it has to be 39 years old, which to me is total insanity. We're going to revise that so that it has a rolling date of 25 years old. That, to me, is also insanity. The PPS states that there be no restriction on the age of the surplus farm dwelling to be severed. And that's what I'm inclined to agree with. That is one of our options, that we have no date of construction for the surplus farm dwelling. And I'll make that a motion, that we have no date. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to get to you, Councillor Back. I'm just making a note here to myself. All right, that is the motion we're dealing with then under recommendation and issue number 13. Speaking to that motion, Councillor Black.
I was going to ask some questions about this, but I don't know, a month ago or so, and different times I've raised the issue to try and understand why it is that the farming community wants conflicting operations in the rural area. I quite frankly don't understand to this date. You have an official plan, you have a zoning bylaw, and the whole idea of that is to regulate conflicts and to limit them. Well, what this does, if we agree with it, it says that we're going to encourage conflicts. So the rural community, if you look, has now got 5,300 rural non-farm residents. These are all urbanites located and living in the farm community. Now you're going to add another, if you look at 13, well, I didn't add up all 4 of them. I only added up the 2 that affected the 25 years. But you're going to add another 3,400 residents. So 3,400 additional conflicts in the rural community. That works out to about 8,500 residents, 2 people per residence. There's 16,000 urbanites living in the rural community, the farming community, where they're trying to farm. And then, because so many have been allowed over the years, and I have spoken to farmers who are for this and others who are totally against allowing severances, and the province has agreed with that. They got rid of the severances. And we've had increasing conflicts that said, all right, now we got to the farmers have to lobby the provincial government to initiate right to farm legislation so they can shut the urbanites up, so they don't have any of their rights to say, well, I got a problem with the smell, I got a problem with the noise, I got a problem with the dust. So, if those rural residents weren't there, that problem and that legislation wouldn't have had to be implemented. And the other legislation that we would not have had to implement is the minimum distance separations. So the more residents, including this policy with the farm amalgamation, including those, we're creating more problems for farmers with their minimum distance separations. So we're restricting their ability to do what they're supposed to be doing. So that's what the part that I do not understand why this community, other communities don't allow it, but this community does. They allow it because they get $80,000 or whatever for the lot. It's short-sightedness in my thinking. So, and now later on I see that we're going to even exempt some of the minimum distance separations. So, please, I will ask a question to planning staff, and I know I've talked to Mary about this before, and I can't see how this is good planning. Is this what you call planning, or is this a farmer policy?
Staff?
I mean, you can answer generally, rather than specifically to the question.
I think that Norfolk County grows a lot of crops that are very important to food security for Ontario and, in fact, for the whole country. I think there is an obligation on our part to let the farmers continue to farm. But I also see that there needs to be some variability, some cases where they need to have some options if they don't wish to be landlords. So in trying to balance that, staff have come forward and said, 25 years means that the farmer has invested time in the community, they have been farming there, it's not just a buy the piece and sever it off once the house is 10 years old. It requires a bit more of a commitment, and so we've tried to look at this from both sides and come to some kind of a compromise that would still enable our farmers to farm, because that's really what we want to do, is let them farm as much as possible. So that's why in your report you have 25 years that the consultant has recommended and staff is supporting that recommendation.
But just on, Mr. Chairman, on my general comments, by allowing the number, I mean, okay, you can allow some severances, and this ultimately is a severance, and you may not impact the farming community. But we're going to have over 8,500 of them. To me, this is bad planning, because what you're saying is, I'm going to allow a conflict to occur in the area that I'm trying not to have a conflict. So I guess maybe, I'm not going to put planning staff on the spot with this. If they want to respond to it, fine, but I think it's bad planning.
Thank you. Do you wish any further comment, Mary or Matt? Okay, I do have a speakers list, gentlemen. I'm gonna stick to it. Councillor Heidt is next, followed by Sonnenberg again, and then Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, my ward is made up mostly rural area as opposed to the urban centers. And for the record, most of the complaints come where neighbors are stacked on top of neighbors. I don't get many in the country. I certainly don't get any at all, I don't think, in the last 2 and some years, about farms operating. People that move out by farms typically like farmers being close to them. Not everyone wants to live in town. I'm one of them. I know several of you guys here are as well. All right? Norfolk County needs growth. And these lots, they've been bought and paid for. People have invested money in them. If they want to sell them to people who want to turn them into a new home and it produces a revenue stream for us on the tax base, good. We need it. The PPS itself doesn't require a date. So why does Norfolk County place another restriction on people where nowhere else in the province is it like that? So I'm going to